In September of 2024, at a naval facility in Sasebo, Japan, the United States Navy decommissioned the last of its Avenger-class minesweepers. There was no ceremony worth remembering. No admiral gave a speech that made the evening news. The ships were old, the budget was tight, and the men who understood what those ships actually did were mostly retired. The hulls were declared excess. The crews were reassigned. The institutional knowledge those vessels carried, knowledge that had been refined over 4 decades of continuous operation in exactly the kind of shallow, mine-infested water that dominates the Persian Gulf, began to dissolve the moment the gangways were pulled. 5 months later, Iran mined the Strait of Hormuz. The question of how the United States Navy arrived at this moment, the most consequential minefield crisis since the Second World War, with no wooden-hulled minesweepers left in the fleet, with the wrong ships in the wrong ocean, with the institutional memory of shallow water mine warfare scattered across retirement communities from Virginia Beach to San Diego, is not a question about budget cuts or bureaucratic incompetence in the ordinary sense. It is a question about what happens when an organization spends 30 years preparing to fight the war it remembers instead of the war that is actually coming. It is a question about the cost of forgetting, measured not in dollars but in straits that cannot be cleared, in tankers that cannot move, and in oil that cannot reach the refineries that keep the American economy functioning. To understand the magnitude of what was lost when the last Avenger was decommissioned, you need to understand what the Avenger class actually was, because the thing that made it irreplaceable is also the thing that sounds, on the surface, almost absurdly primitive. The Avenger class minesweeper was built almost entirely out of wood, not as a design quirk, not as a cost-saving measure, as the central operational requirement of the entire platform. Wood, because the mines the Avenger was designed to hunt are triggered by magnetic fields. A steel-hulled ship moving through water generates a magnetic signature that extends outward from its hull in every direction, a signature that a properly designed influence mine can detect from a distance of several meters and use to trigger detonation. A wooden ship, by contrast, generates almost no magnetic signature at all. It moves through a minefield like a ghost. The mines cannot see it. They cannot feel it. They sit on the seafloor and wait for a signal that never comes, while the wooden hull above them does the quiet and methodical work of finding them and destroying them before they find anyone else. The Avenger-class hulls were built from oak, Douglas fir, and Alaskan cedar. The construction technique was called diagonal planking, layering the wood at opposing angles to create a hull strong enough to handle open ocean operations while maintaining the non-magnetic properties that made the ships effective in minefields. Inside that wooden shell, every component that would normally be made of steel in a conventional warship was substituted with non-magnetic alternatives: aluminum fittings, stainless steel where metal was unavoidable, fiberglass where neither would work. The propulsion system was diesel-electric, chosen specifically because it generates less acoustic and magnetic noise than conventional propulsion. The sweep gear, the cables, cutters, and influence generators used to find and neutralize mines was engineered to the same non-magnetic standard. The entire ship, from keel to mast, was designed around a single operational requirement: get into the minefield and get the mines out without becoming a casualty of the mines you are trying to clear. The Avenger-class ships entered service in 1987. They were built for the Cold War, yes, but the specific threat they were designed to counter was not a Soviet submarine in the deep Atlantic. It was the Soviet mine inventory, one of the largest and most sophisticated in the world, and the threat that inventory posed to shallow water choke points exactly like the one the United States Navy is now trying to operate in. The Navy understood in 1987 what it apparently forgot by 2024, that the most dangerous waters in any conflict are not the deep ocean passages where carrier battle groups maneuver and fleet engagements are decided, but the shallow coastal zones where the water is warm, the bottom is cluttered, the acoustic conditions are terrible, and a $50 contact mine sitting in 3 meters of water can send a billion-dollar warship to the bottom in 30 seconds. Operation Praying Mantis, in 1988, proved the point before the Avengers were even fully operational. The frigate USS Samuel B. Roberts struck an Iranian mine in the Persian Gulf and nearly sank. The explosion blew a hole in the hull 4.5 meters wide, broke the ship's keel, and put 10 American sailors in the hospital. The mine that did it cost Iran approximately $1,500 to produce. The repair of the Samuel B. Roberts cost the United States Navy $89 million and took 13 months. The mine won that exchange by a ratio of roughly 60,000 to 1, and that ratio does not account for the operational disruption, the intelligence failure, or the strategic signal it sent to every adversary watching. The Navy responded to Praying Mantis by taking mine warfare seriously for a while. The Avenger program was completed, training pipelines were established, Doctrine was written, the institutional muscle for shallow water mine countermeasures was built and maintained through the 1990s with something approaching genuine commitment. Then the Cold War ended, the budgets got cut, and the threat picture changed in the minds of the people who control the money. The Soviet Union was gone. The peer competitor with the world-class mine inventory had dissolved. The assumption that settled over the planning offices in Washington, the assumption that was never stated out loud because stating it out loud would have required acknowledging its absurdity, was that future American conflicts would be fought against enemies with deep water navies in open ocean environments where wooden minesweepers were simply not part of the required force structure. The diesel submarine fleet went first. Then the dedicated Mine Warfare Training Command was reduced. Then the Avenger-class ships began to age without a credible replacement program anywhere on the shipbuilding schedule. The officers who had spent careers learning the specific craft of shallow water mine countermeasures retired, and the institutional positions they vacated were filled by officers whose career paths ran through carrier aviation and surface warfare and submarine operations in deep water. The prestigious assignments, the assignments that led to flag rank, the assignments that shaped the organizational culture of the Navy from the inside out. Mine warfare became a specialty that smart officers avoided if they wanted to advance, which meant the people most capable of preserving the institutional knowledge were the people with the strongest incentive to go somewhere else. By 2020, the Avenger-class ships were operating well past their designed service life. They were expensive to maintain precisely because of what made them valuable. Wooden hulls require a level of craftsmanship that the modern American shipbuilding industry has largely abandoned, and the specialized materials and techniques required to keep them seaworthy are not the kind of thing you can order from a standard naval supply catalog. The ships were costing more every year to keep running. The replacement program, the Littoral combat ship, was years behind schedule and hundreds of millions over budget, and the people making the decommissioning decision were working from a threat assessment that did not include an Iranian minefield in the Strait of Hormuz, because that scenario, though entirely plausible to anyone who had followed Iranian military doctrine for the previous 2 decades, was not the scenario the planning documents were built around. The Littoral combat ship is what the Navy sent to replace the Avenger class in the shallow water mission. It has a metal hull. That single fact is the operational catastrophe in miniature. A metal-hulled ship in a magnetic minefield is not a minesweeper. It is a target. The ship's own magnetic signature can trigger the mines it is supposed to be neutralizing. The crew knows this. The commanders know this. The admirals in Bahrain running the Fifth Fleet know this. Everyone in the operational chain of command understands that the ship currently tasked with the mine countermeasures mission in the Persian Gulf is not capable of performing that mission in the environment that mission now requires. There is one Littoral combat ship in the Gulf. The others are in Malaysia, thousands of miles away, because the deployment schedule that was built before the war started has not been fully adjusted to the reality the war created. The United Kingdom's contribution to the mine warfare problem tells its own story. Britain maintained a single mine countermeasures vessel in the Gulf, HMS Chiddingfold, a dedicated mine hunter with a fiberglass hull and a crew trained specifically for the mission. When the threat environment deteriorated to the point where maintaining the ship in the region became untenable, the Royal Navy withdrew it. The withdrawal itself became an embarrassment. HMS Chiddingfold could not make the journey home under its own power across the distances involved, so it was loaded onto a semi-submersible heavy-lift cargo ship and transported back to the United Kingdom as deck cargo. A mine hunter being carried home on a freighter. That image, more than any strategic analysis, captures the state of Western mine warfare capability in 2026. The dolphins are still working. This is not a metaphor. The United States Navy's Marine Mammal Program, which has trained bottlenose dolphins to detect underwater mines using their natural sonar since the 1960s, has dolphins on active duty in the Persian Gulf right now. They are more accurate than most of the mechanical systems the Navy has developed in the intervening decades. Underwater drones designated knifefish and kingfish are running seafloor surveys. MH-60 Seahawk helicopters are dragging sonar equipment through the water from above. P-8 Poseidon aircraft are flying continuous overhead surveillance patterns. Every tool the Navy has that can contribute to the mine hunting mission is being used. The sailors operating those tools are exhausted and professional and doing everything the mission requires of them. The problem is not the sailors. The problem is not the equipment available, though the equipment is inadequate. The problem is the decision made in September of 2024 by people who had access to 30 years of Iranian military doctrine, 30 years of Iranian mine-laying capability assessments, and 30 years of clear strategic logic pointing toward exactly the scenario that is now playing out, and who decided anyway that the ships designed specifically to handle that scenario were too expensive and too old to justify keeping in service. The repair of that decision is going to take years. New minesweepers cannot be designed, contracted, built, and delivered in months. The shipbuilding capacity to build wooden-hulled vessels at scale does not currently exist in the American industrial base and cannot be reconstituted quickly. The officers who understood the doctrine at the operational level are retired and cannot be recalled with the institutional memory intact. The Avenger-class ships are gone. The mines are in the water. The wrong ships are in the wrong ocean. And, somewhere in a retirement community in Virginia Beach, a former mine warfare officer who spent 3 decades trying to explain to budget committees why wooden ships mattered is watching the news and not saying anything because there is nothing left to say that he has not already said, in writing, on the record, in documents that were read and filed and ultimately ignored by the people with the authority to act on them. The history of military failure is rarely the history of cowardice or incompetence in the theatrical sense. It is usually the history of organizations making locally rational decisions. Cut the expensive old ship, invest in the modern platform, trust the updated threat assessment that aggregate into catastrophic institutional blind spots only visible in retrospect from the other side of the crisis that the decisions made inevitable. The United States Navy did not forget how to hunt mines in shallow water by accident. It forgot deliberately, one budget cycle at a time, one decommissioned hull at a time, one retired mine warfare officer at a time, until the forgetting was complete and the strait was closed and the question of how to reopen it had no good answer left.